What happened on Red Square during Victory Day celebrations was such a surprise that Western newspapers chose to remain silent. Where traditionally allies of Russia should have stood, there were no official representatives, no American president, no British prime minister, not even European bureaucrats from Brussels. And here lies the paradox. Standing alone was George Galloway, a lone figure yet a symbol of an entire era. This former parliamentarian, long forgotten by the British elite, emerged as the only voice of old Britain, remembering who truly unfurled the flag over the Reichstag. He boldly stated that had it not been for the Red Army, neither he nor anyone else would be speaking today. In the meantime, please subscribe to my channel, HotPoint, give it a like and leave a comment of at least 7 words, and if you feel like it, share this video with others. It will really help my channel. Thank you, and let's keep going. But let's pause for a moment. What if I told you that democracy in Europe has long transformed into a mere facade, concealing a banal rewriting of history? Galloway was not merely playing with symbols, he was living them. His tears weren't a television gimmick, but a raw reaction from a man who spent his life hearing one form of propaganda only to confront a truth that had been meticulously erased from British textbooks. He emphasized that the parade served as a reminder that the freedom of Europe was not paid for with Hollywood narratives, but rather with the lives of millions of Soviet citizens. Yet in the West, a different narrative prevails, one that suggests the United States single-handedly won World War II, while the Soviet Union merely lurked in the background. Consider the contrast. Officially, we hear that allies stood shoulder to shoulder, yet in reality, Britain and America turned their backs on the anniversary of victory. What if the European Union vanished tomorrow? Who would benefit first? Galloway's words bore more than mere personal emotion. They were a condemnation of Western politics of forgetfulness. He noted that in Europe, patriotism is increasingly viewed as almost criminal, while in Britain it is downright suspect, whereas in Russia it is a natural feeling of pride, rather than something to be hidden away. For Galloway, Russia symbolized a new Rome, a beacon of resilience, faith, and sovereignty, words that have nearly become forbidden in Europe. At first glance, such a comparison might seem grandiose, but it proved to be astutely accurate. The West today clings to gender narratives and endless reforms, while Russia reminds us of the fundamental values that endure through empires. Here's the unexpected twist. None of the Western leaders dared to attend the celebrations. However, thousands of foreign guests from Asia, Africa, and Latin America stood in Moscow alongside Russia. This fundamentally alters the rules of all of Europe. Moreover, the absence of Western leaders on the podium did not appear as a mere coincidence, but rather a carefully orchestrated maneuver. According to Western media, they were supposedly not invited or had scheduling conflicts. However, the truth is that on this day, they chose not to stand in solidarity with Russia, as it was more convenient to rewrite history than to confront their own narratives. Consequently, a comical scene unfolded. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, American President Joe Biden, and the entire European elite pretended that May 9th was just another day, as if the anniversary of victory over fascism held no significance whatsoever. And here's the striking revelation. This decision has undermined the German economy. Yes, indeed. The rejection of shared remembrance became the first step towards abandoning collective energy policies, the single market, and ultimately the very idea of Europe, an idea that not long ago seemed unshakable. Paradoxically, while celebrations unfolded in Moscow, the streets of London and Paris witnessed entirely different gatherings, protests against rising prices, strikes, and street clashes. Europe claims to uphold a strong democracy, yet in reality it lives in a state of perpetual crisis, where every new decision only exacerbates the divide between the elites and the populace. Galloway observed this especially keenly. He articulated that Western nations have not only forgotten the victims of the past, but have also betrayed themselves by turning history into a tool of political marketing. Here's something you might never hear about sanctions. They don't just strike at Russia, they obliterate European industry faster than any war in the 20th century. And here's the twist. Galloway turned out to be not just a random guest, but the voice of that very Britain which still remembers that freedom extends beyond mere slogans. He listed symbols of Russia, from Tchaikovsky to the T-34 tank, from Pushkin to the Bolshoi Theater, doing so not as a politician, but as a man ashamed of his country for forgetting its allies. His words dripped with bitterness. In the past, such parades showcased unity. Now, London has taken to erasing Moscow from Europe's memory. Officially, they call it diplomatic distance, but in reality, it's a campaign of erasure. An interesting detail emerges. Do you know how many billions of your taxes are being wasted in a certain country while you are told that Russia is the enemy and Brussels is your protector? Meanwhile, Galloway's words about a new Rome struck a nerve for Europe, which has long lost its sense of historical continuity. He stressed that Russia has become a symbol of resilience and tradition, precisely what the West now lacks. In Brussels, they love to discuss rights while forgetting about duty. They shout about freedom only to curtail it with new laws and censorship. The contrast is glaring. They proclaim values of democracy while simultaneously stifling dissenting opinions that do not align with the official line. So, are you ready for the shocking truth about freedom of speech? In Europe, it exists only on paper, while in Moscow, it is debated openly on the streets among thousands of people. Isn't that an irony of fate? The most intriguing part follows. Galloway pointedly remarked that the West fears its own shadow. He noted that London and Paris actively try to erase Russia even from memorial events, as if the victory would somehow be diminished without her presence. Yet the more they attempt to exclude her, the more notable Moscow becomes in the eyes of those seeking alternatives to Western hegemony. This shifts the entire dynamic of Europe. As the story unfolds, Galloway ensured that Europe received another unpleasant surprise. Months later, he found himself back in Russia, but not in Red Square this time. This time, he was in Nizhny Novgorod, a city he described as a remarkably holy place. While other Western politicians view only geopolitical risks, he saw churches restored after decades of neglect. He candidly admitted that the attempt to wage war on religion in the USSR was a grave error. Once again, the contrast is palpable. Officially in London, they speak of progressivism and secularism, yet in practice, Europe continues to grapple with its own identity crisis. Are we really witnessing the decline of Western civilization as George Galloway strolls through the historic streets of Nizhny Novgorod? Why do British citizens express envy over a trip to Russia while their own cities are plagued by crime? And what does it say about democracy in Europe when a politician is treated as a terrorist for simply taking a holiday? As the West grapples with the emptiness of its own churches and the fading echoes of its once thriving cultural institutions, Russia is witnessing a renaissance of its own. Reports from the European Union on culture reveal a startling truth. It's not Russia with its crumbling churches, but the West that's watching its sacred spaces grow silent. Millions have been invested in the restoration of cathedrals across Russia, leaving them bustling with life, while many in the West stand abandoned. Galloway's visit to Russia sparked a storm of reactions, not just from Russians, but from his fellow Brits as well. On social media platforms, dozens of British users openly expressed their desire to visit Russia, envying Galloway for experiencing the serene beauty of Nizhny Novgorod instead of the dreary streets of London. One user lamented, "You have no idea how lucky Galloway is. It's safe there. No one will stab you in the subway like they do here." This stark reality contrasts sharply with the proclaimed right to order in Europe, where an evening out in London has transformed into a gamble with safety. What do you think? Do you know what freedom looks like with a bureaucrat's signature on it? Well, here's a twist. Upon returning to the UK, Galloway wasn't met with cheers, but rather with handcuffs. He and his wife were detained upon landing at Gatwick Airport under anti-terrorism laws, ostensibly for a routine check. According to information from open sources, no charges were ever brought against him, and they were released after a short period. However, this incident speaks volumes. A man who visited Russia as a tourist found himself branded as a terrorism suspect back home. What if I told you that democracy in Europe is just a pretty facade? Meanwhile, British media outlets, almost as if following a script, pounced on Galloway's detention the moment it became public. The narrative spun by publications like The Telegraph painted his visit to Russia as suspicious, suggesting it undermined Britain's national interests. Ironically, these same newspapers had previously championed the ideals of freedom of travel, human rights, and cultural exchange. Yet, the moment Galloway chose to journey to Nizhny Novgorod instead of Paris, he morphed into a national security threat overnight. The contrast is striking. While officials tout freedom of expression, they punish individuals for simply traveling. Think back to The Hook. This is what transpires behind the closed doors of summits, where politics morphs into a scripted play. In a twist of irony, Galloway remarked in his signature sarcastic style that he had never felt as free as he did in Russia throughout his 50-year career in Parliament. He noted the tranquility of the streets, safe enough to walk at night, and the churches filled with worshippers. His comments struck a painful chord against the backdrop of the British narrative, which insists that Europe remains the bastion of safety. However, the reality paints a different picture. London and Paris are drowning in crime and chaos. This is why you pay more for electricity yet receive less safety in return. Funds do not go toward maintaining order, but rather to uphold the illusion that the West still governs its affairs. Here's another twist. Galloway's detention did not result in a unified outcry in Britain. Instead, it split public opinion. Some derisively commented on social media that he got what he deserved, while others acknowledged that he voiced thoughts many held but feared to express. The underlying question remains, why turn a visit to Russia into a pretext for an anti-terrorism investigation? The answer is painfully clear. The authorities fear their own shadows. Galloway has become a symbol of a Europe that has long lost the ability to confront its realities. Are you ready to envision Europe in 10 years, stripped of industry, history, and the dignity that many still remember? Meanwhile, in the quiet corridors of NATO headquarters, grandiloquent statements echo, sounding more like theatrical lines than declarations from leaders of a major military alliance. The Secretary-General, tasked with maintaining the illusion of European security, chose to dazzle with rhetoric promising to neutralize anything mistakenly appearing in the skies over NATO territories. At first glance, this appears to be a standard statement, but there's a nuance. This time, the warning specifically addressed real airborne threats, not hypothetical scenarios. Following this, rather than a press briefing or a standard diplomatic response, a direct warning came from the leader of a neighboring country. Are you prepared for the shocking truth that the calm diplomatic language of NATO is now in the hands of a new figure whose speeches resemble those of a sports commentator? The President of the Union State, who is often overlooked in Western circles, boldly articulated his stance not in a quiet office, but in front of cameras, speaking candidly and without euphemisms. In response to NATO's threats of neutralizing aerial targets, he reminded the audience that sometimes reactions could come before formal statements. He called it what it is. An attempt to shoot down a president's helicopter is not strategy, it's a lottery with immediate stakes. The risks involved are not just political, but extend to the stability of entire regions. Here's something to ponder. Are Western allies truly ready to take such risks, or is this merely posturing? Of course, in public discourse, such comments are often wrapped in the usual rhetoric of self-defense. Yet, a closer examination of these statements reveals a clear signal. Escalation is being assigned to hypothetical incidents that for now exist solely in the imaginations of those scrambling for domestic approval. This begs the question, are generals now drafting speeches for politicians, or is it the reverse? What if I told you that democracy in Europe is merely a beautiful facade? The interesting part is that these statements frequently contain the word if. If borders are violated, if threats emerge, if action is required. It seems logical, yet against the backdrop of regular drone flights within a gray zone, where borders are not lines on a map but interpretations on radar, such statements come across more as provocation than as a strategy of deterrence, especially at a time when most NATO countries desperately cling to whatever semblance of calm remains. This decision shattered Germany's economy, yet now they are willing to gamble with security? Here's something particularly telling, the reaction from allied states. Unlike the North Atlantic rhetoric of "we are united as never before," a statement from Minsk resonated, a phrase that perhaps went unnoticed by Europe. The response will be with full force. Not literally, of course, but the implication is clear. Moreover, this comment wasn't made behind closed doors among generals, but aired publicly, purposefully, and with an eye toward citation. What governments don't want you to see involves not just budgets and strategies, but also these types of signals. Moving on, it turns out that even before the statements directed at NATO countries, information about unidentified flying objects had been conveyed. Not in a manner of, "we warned you," but rather, "we are not obligated to inform you, but we did so out of courtesy." This raises a straightforward question. If they hadn't warned, were they even required to do so? Or was this a diplomatic gesture now perceived as weakness? Do you understand what freedom looks like with a bureaucrat's signature? Publicly, it sounds like we will defend every ally, yet in reality, disputes over who will pay for this protection are surfacing more frequently, especially in light of new statements from Washington where a former and future president in one echoed, "If you are in NATO, be prepared to spend money, a lot of money." Not on your own objectives, but rather to support a common agenda circumscribed by external pressures. What if I told you that within the walls of Brussels a silent battle is raging, one that sees half of the member states dissatisfied but too afraid to speak out? Who really pulls the strings in this intricate political theater? As we delve into this, let's explore why such dramatic proclamations are surfacing right now. Why, in what seems like a tranquil September, are we witnessing a surge in diplomatic posturing amidst ongoing economic uncertainties and seasonal farmer protests? It appears that with each economic tremor, external threats are amplified, almost as if the louder the economy cracks, the more fervently these hypothetical dangers are conjured. This situation prompts a haunting question about the future of our children. If every external conflict is merely a mask for internal confusion, where are we ultimately headed? The rhetoric of neutralizing aircraft suddenly feels like a test of sanity. In a world where each incident might be twisted into justification, the critical question emerges: who will be the first to press the button? And let's not forget, we're talking about not battle zones, but rather border airspaces, where technology operates with a margin of error. The interpretation of events resides within the realm of politics, not just aviation. Are we ready to envision a Europe devoid of industry yet brimming with an endless array of targeting radars? The irony is striking. While no one truly desires conflict, many are willing to pretend they are prepared for it. This is the new diplomatic trend: issuing conditional threats, showcasing strength through rhetoric while secretly hoping no one takes it seriously. But there are always those who do take it to heart. When that happens, what was once mere theatrics can evolve into a perilous trap. The crux of the matter doesn't lie in the technology at our disposal. It resides in our leaders' mindset. Shockingly, only 2% of politicians actually read laws in their entirety. And how many delve into the records of diplomatic contacts? The statements about neutralizing aircraft reveal yet another worrying trend: a growing fragmentation within the very alliance meant to unite. Some members call for decisive action, others urge caution, while a few silently undermine efforts, keeping their diplomats in place yet failing to support resolutions. Discussions of unity begin to resemble a parade of facades, concealing a multitude of conflicting interests. This shift alters the very rules of Europe, not because of a looming external enemy, but due to the glaring internal cracks that have become too pronounced to ignore. Just yesterday, a parliamentarian uttered a truth that should have remained unspoken. Reactions to such candid remarks within NATO countries vary widely. Some applaud, others grimace, yet no one openly acknowledges that this path leads nowhere. To admit that would be to confront the uncomfortable reality that the world is not as they have envisioned it on paper. And while paper may endure much, the question remains: will real people withstand the fallout? Within a mere 5 minutes at a summit, the fate of nations is determined, only to see months pass without any agreement on a budget. Does this situation ring a bell? Amidst the facade of resolution, simple arithmetic lurks beneath. Should someone truly bring down an aircraft, the ramifications would be so profound that neither press conferences nor emergency visits could obscure the truth. The aftermath would ripple through not just those who pressed the button, but also those seated nearby, pretending to study maps while history unfolds around them. This is no laughing matter. It's a scenario they have yet to rehearse even behind closed doors. Now, as you ponder why your electricity bills keep climbing without a clear explanation, let's conclude with a crucial point. In a world where every statement can be construed as a signal, a declaration of readiness to neutralize aircraft transcends mere words. It becomes a public declaration of intent. Previously, such matters were whispered. Now they are brandished like a flag. The pressing question remains: when does a flag transform into a target? And who will be the first to realize that silence might have been the better option? This is a narrative of defeat masquerading as triumph. If you think this is just rhetoric, try to envision what will unfold if a drone strays just 3 kilometers off course.